Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Gavin Gray. Our top stories. More violence as Iran's protests continue for a fifth day. President Rouhani insists they're an opportunity and not a threat. High time for a change. Californians celebrate as cannabis is legalized for recreational use. And taking a stand against sexual harassment, Stars launch a campaign to support women in the workplace. Plus, no snow? No problem. Confidence from China ahead of the 2022 Winter Olympics. Hello. In Iran, a police officer has been shot dead and 3 others wounded after a fifth day of anti-government protests. It's the first death of a member of the security and represents a significant escalation in the unrest. What began as a protest against the rising cost of living now seems to be taking on political overtones. A dozen protesters have been killed in the last 24 hours. Our correspondent Rana Ramipur from the BBC's Persian service has the latest.
Once again across Iran, thousands of people have taken to the streets. A poster of the country's supreme leader Ali Khamenei set alight and then torn down before the crowds push over the wall of this town hall in the city of Bandar Abbas. They're angry at unemployment, rising prices and what many of them see as widespread corruption. It's the boldest challenge to the country's leadership in nearly a decade. The demonstrations began in the northwestern city of Mashhad, a key base for the most outspoken critics of elected President Hassan Rouhani. But it has quickly turned into a widespread movement against the entire establishment, the supreme leader. This is the biggest show of dissent in Iran since the post-election rallies of 2009, but limited to urban areas of the country like the capital Tehran. This time, the protests are more widespread, with towns and cities all over the country looking for social, political and economic change. Authorities are continuing to suspend social media platforms out of fear they'll be used to organize protests. The BBC has received reports of text messages like this one being sent to people urging them not to take part. A handful of pro-government marchers are attempting to the wider demonstrations, but with limited information coming out of the country, it's difficult to gauge how many people are involved. In the last 24 hours, President Rouhani has spoken out twice against the protests, downplaying their significance, instead accusing Iran's enemies of instigating unrest.
Our victory against the US and the Zionist regime is unbearable for our success in the region is intolerable for them. They're after revenge and are trying to provoke people.
But his words have failed to calm the situation. In certain areas of the country, unemployment is as high as 60%, and reports of extreme corruption have Iranians frustrated and hungry for change. And tonight, Iranian state TV is reporting that a police officer has been shot dead. It's the first reported attack on a member of the security forces since the demonstrations began last week. A move that may escalate the confrontation between protesters and the state and potentially lead to more bloodshed. Rana Rahimpour, BBC News.
Alex Vatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. and joins us now. Alex, why is there such a disconnect, it would seem, between the government then and ordinary people?
You know, Gavin, if you go back to May of this year when Hassan Rouhani was re-elected with a landslide 24 million voters backing him, they voted for him because he made a simple but powerful promise. He said, when I'm re-elected, there'll be more political freedoms in this country. He hasn't delivered on that at all. In fact, what he's done is turn away from the reformist grass movements and turn to the hardliners looking for accommodation, because Hassan Rouhani very quickly, right after his re-election, forgot the ordinary men and women of Iran. His eyes on the top job in the country, which is the position of the supreme leadership. When the sitting supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, passes on, Rouhani would like that job. And to get there, in his calculations, he needs to buddy up with the Revolutionary Guards and other hardline elements. In this process, he totally forgot the people. He forgot the painful economic conditions of the country. And this, what we're witnessing right now in Iran, is a result of that neglect by Rouhani. But let me also say this. This is not really about Rouhani. This is about the supreme leader. This is about the system. This is about 40 years of grievances in many ways having built up. And the people are just simply, as we are watching on our TV screens, are saying the only way that seems to work with this regime is if they can see you in the streets. Otherwise, they don't pay attention to you.
In the past, the Iranian authorities have always blamed outsiders for some of the fate that has befallen them. Are people out in Iran now very wary of that being used as an excuse?
You know, the Iranians have always been worried about what is happening in the neighborhood, in places like Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, happening to them. Iran is a large multi-ethnic country with many different religious sects and so forth. So there's always been that worry that such conditions as seen elsewhere could come to Iran if the sort of stability of the country is put at risk. But at the same time, they've reached a level where they're asking themselves, apparently from what I can tell, watching Iranian Persian language social media, they're saying, at one point should we have to sort of ask ourselves the simple question of how much more can we put up with this? And if it's a risky, project to sort of embark upon and seek to come out to the streets as a way of getting the authorities' attention, let's do it that way. And that's where we are today. But the idea that some foreign entity in Europe, in North America, is the instigator behind all this, I think is fanciful at the very best. Just listen to what the ordinary people are saying. The idea that this is all instigated by some, central point somewhere on the planet, I think that's just the authorities in Tehran putting their heads in the sand.
From the Middle East Institute, is to be a cash crop, and state and local governments could collect $1 billion a year in tax revenue. But opponents say the new law will lead to more driving under the influence of the drug and introduce young people to drug use. Here's CBS reporter Danielle Nottingham.
A ribbon-cutting ceremony kicked off the historic day at a dispensary in Oakland, where hundreds of people lined up to buy recreational pot starting at 6 a.m. Harborside is one of the first shops in California to get the new city and state permits. Henry Wykowski was the first customer.
It's been a long time coming.
California joined 7 other states and the District of Columbia, where recreational marijuana is legal. Massachusetts is set to begin sales in July.
A couple of blackjacks and a lemon tree would be good.
But California is the largest market in the nation, and that has many other states watching closely.
It's going to send a message to other states that legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana is the public policy decision and that it works.
Buyers have to be at least 21 years old and can only purchase up to an ounce of recreational marijuana. Other restrictions include limiting the level of THC in each package of edibles. Recreational pot also costs more than medical marijuana because of a higher tax. Users say they want to end the stigma surrounding pot use.
I'm an employed, functioning adult, and I also smoke weed, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
With the addition of recreational sales, the pot industry in California is expected to generate at least $1 billion in tax revenue annually. Danielle Nottingham, CBS News, Los Angeles.
More than 300 women from Hollywood's entertainment industry have launched an initiative sexual harassment in workplaces. The campaign, called Time's Up, includes Hollywood stars such as Cate Blanchett, America Ferrera and Eva Longoria. Now, it'll provide legal support for women and men who suffer abuse. Well, Peter Bowes is our correspondent in Los Angeles and joins us now. Peter, this is much more than about just Tinseltown.
It is, and that's the point, one of the main points that this group of women wants to make, that it isn't just the entertainment industry. Clearly, the very high-profile cases over the last few weeks and months have focused on key figures, men in the entertainment business who have been accused of sexual harassment. But this is about those women and men in less famous jobs, shall we put it, less glamorized jobs, as this organisation puts it. It could be cleaners, it could be farm workers who are sexually harassed in their workplaces as well. And this is a group of women that have got together to raise help as legal aid for some of those individuals if they are involved in a situation that eventually ends up in court. And to date, they've already raised more than $13 million.
So they've raised the money. How else are they going to make their point? Obviously, they've got a voice because of their influence.
Yes, they're going to make their point in lots of different ways. They're encouraging women at next weekend's Golden Globe Awards to wear black, simply to highlight this issue. And a number of actresses, Meryl Streep, for example, have already said that they intend to do that. But this group is also calling for wider changes, not only in Hollywood, but in the workplace. They want legislation to stop companies that seem persistently to tolerate sexual harassment in their organisations, and they also want a number of other measures, legal measures that they think will help curb the sexual harassment that goes on around the world in workplaces, the ending of non-disclosure agreements that can in some cases be used to hide the perpetrator of sexual harassment.
And just briefly, Peter, bearing in mind this issue is now being opened up to other professions and industries, any news from the President?
Well, we haven't heard anything from the President on this issue today, and of course it is well known that he was accused during his campaign of a number of women. There were many allegations against him. He has been rather quiet on this issue of sexual harassment, certainly in Hollywood and the wider workplace. But I'm sure one of the goals of organisations like this group of women, will be to highlight this issue at a political level, and that includes the President and the Senate as well.
Peter Bowes from Los Angeles, thank you. Storm Carmen has cut power to tens of thousands of homes in western France. Wind speeds of up to 140 kilometres an hour battered the country's Atlantic coast, leaving 65,000 properties, mainly in the Brittany region, without electricity. The storm is expected to move towards Germany overnight. Elsewhere, a deep freeze has settled over large parts of the United States and Canada, bringing extreme cold, snow and travel disruption, as Sarah Corker reports.
On France's Atlantic coast, New Year was ushered in by the arrival of wild weather. Strong winds and rough seas meant seaside cities cancelled traditional New Year swimming events. Winds exceeding 140 kilometres an hour knocked out power to thousands of homes across Brittany. This man said the storm was longer than expected and had already done some damage to the roof. Police say one man in his 60s was killed when a tree fell on his car near the French-Spanish border. Elsewhere and across the Atlantic, the United States is experiencing a record-breaking Arctic cold. From Texas to Maine, the sub-zero temperatures and snow are unrelenting. At Chicago Airport, there were long delays.
It was brutally cold. I mean, 5 degrees and the lows in the single digits. Is something else.
And for almost a week now, parts of Canada have been colder than the North Pole. Niagara has become an icy spectacle. With temperatures falling below -30 degrees Celsius, even the penguins at Calgary Zoo have been moved inside. There's widespread disruption on the roads, railways and in the air. But for these brave souls in Pennsylvania, it's never too cold for a New Year's dip. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Well, stay with us here on BBC News because still to come. 4 men are stabbed to death in London in just 24 hours. Police have made 5 arrests. This is BBC News and these are the latest headlines. There's been more violence in Iran as protests continue for a 5th day, but President Rouhani says they're an opportunity, not a threat. And California has become the largest state in the U.S. to legalize the recreational use of cannabis. Authorities in Costa Rica have now recovered the 12 victims of a plane crash in a mountainous area near the beach town of Punta Isleta. Officials and witnesses say strong winds were a factor in the crash. Those killed included 10 U.S. citizens, 5 from the same family, and 2 Costa Rican pilots. Virginia Langerberg reports.
For the family and friends of the 2 Costa Rican pilots, it's been a heartbreaking wait outside the San Jose forensics facility. Their loved ones are yet to be formally identified by autopsy, but that's simply procedural confirmation to what they sadly already know. There were no survivors when this single-engine crashed minutes after takeoff into a mountainous area off the beach town of Punta Isleta. 12 people were on board the chartered flight, including 10 US citizens, of which 5 were from the same family from Scarsdale, New York. The relatives of the American victims are now thought to have made the journey to Costa Rica after being scheduled to arrive late on Monday. With the bodies now recovered, officials turned their attention to the cause of the crash, witnesses telling them strong winds must have played a part.
Normally the planes leave on the beach side, where we are right now, but yesterday there was so much wind it fly at the height of the treetops.
Witnesses ran to the scene, but the plane had burst into flames on impact.
We heard tons of explosions. When we reached the valley, there was nothing we could do.
The accident occurred just after noon on Sunday in the country's northwest near Bajuco, an area popular with tourists. The plane was reportedly owned and operated by domestic airline Nature Air. Costa Rica's Civil Aviation Agency says the aircraft was up to date with its certifications and had been inspected a month earlier. Virginia Langerberg, BBC News.
Air accident investigators in Australia say it could take months to establish why a seaplane carrying a prominent British businessman and 4 members of his family crashed into a river near Sydney on New Year's Eve. Cousins died along with his fiancée and her daughter. The pilot was also killed. Mr. Cousins' 2 grown-up sons also died. 4 young men have been stabbed in London in a 24-hour period either side of the New Year celebrations. Police say the deaths are unrelated. Ben Ando reports.
Late morning, Enfield, North London, the victim aged 18. Early evening, West Ham, the victim 20 years old. 3 hours later, Tulse Hill, South London, a teenager of 17. And then in the early hours of New Year's Day, a 20-year-old man killed in Old Street. All 4 stabbed to death, but according to the police, none of the murders are linked.
Tragically, there are 4 families who awake this morning to the heartbreaking news that they've lost loved ones to the callous use of knives as lethal weapons. Our detectives are working tirelessly today and going forward to bring those who've committed these murders to justice.
The 3 murders before midnight take the total number of fatal stabbings in London for 2017 to 80. That compares with 60 in 2016. Police say the reasons for the increase are complex, but it underlines
London needs me alive.
One campaigner who lost a son to knife crime says youngsters need more help to make the right choice.
So I don't carry a knife.
They are living in total fear. They weren't born killers. They didn't just become like that. Process. And now what we've got to do is unravel that process, stage by stage by stage, to get to the core of the individual, which is the state of their heart and the state of their mindset.
As work goes on at the scene of the first knife killing of 2018, the question is, will this worrying trend continue? Ben Ando, BBC News, South London.
Here in the UK, eyewitnesses have been describing a huge fire which destroyed up to 1,400 vehicles in a multi-storey car park in Liverpool. The blaze at King's Dock, next to Liverpool's Echo Arena, is said to have spread after one vehicle caught fire on Sunday afternoon. Danny Savage has the story.
It was shortly after dark yesterday evening when fire took hold in the multi-storey car park on Liverpool's famous waterfront. The fire service says a small fire in a Land Rover spread rapidly. This is a photo taken of it at the time. As the blaze spread, cars could be heard exploding. The car park is next to the Liverpool Arena, where an international horse show was taking place. Those attending helped get the horses to safety. It was soon a huge blaze. Merseyside Fire and Rescue say it's one of the worst they've ever dealt with. This morning, the blackened building was surrounded by fire engines. It's likely it will have to be demolished. After the fire had been put out this morning after many hours, some dogs which had been left in those cars were safely rescued and reunited with their owners. As the dogs were handed back to their owners, there was a hug of gratitude for the firefighters. The insurance bill will run to millions of pounds, but thankfully no one was hurt. Danny Savage, BBC News, Liverpool.
In just over a month's time, the world's attention will turn to South Korea for the opening of the 2018 Winter Olympics. And yet in China, questions are already being asked about the following 2022 Games. The site is in the mountains to the north of Beijing, partially in an arid region called Chongli, so vast amounts of artificial snow will be required to host the event. Stephen McDonnell reports.
Beijing is gearing up for the Winter Olympics, well ahead of schedule. It's on events like this, the Free Ski and Snowboard Half-Pipe World Cup.
It's a beautiful place, the pipe's good, the snow is wonderful, so yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Chinese competitors are knocked out in the face of the sport's best, but they're excited the Winter Games will soon be here for the first time.
The only difference is it'll be slightly colder here. The rest will all be the same.
Wind howls down from the Mongolian plateau, and it's often below -10 during the daytime, prompting fears this could scare away spectators. Then there's the enormous volume of artificial snow needed for the event. This is an arid region which can have little winter precipitation. Gerald, who's worked on 8 Winter Games, says man-made snow will ensure the quality of conditions at various venues.
These are not better.
Australia's Brittany Cox is the current Moguls World Champion. With what she sees.
Well, this is a world-class standard mogul course, and people are kind of asking whether China are going to be able to pull this off here time, and seeing the transformation that they've made just over the last 10 months into the facilities here, it makes me quite confident that they're going to be able to do it.
If there's one thing China seems to know how to do, it's meet a construction deadline, leaving the International Olympic Committee less nervous than it might be. A new high-speed train link will even cut a 3.5-hour car drive from the city to just over an hour. And there are also broader goals for the Beijing Games.
The Chinese government is hoping that by holding the Winter Olympics, it'll encourage many more people here to get involved in sports like skiing and skating. The Games will also be used to show off this country's capacity to host these mega events. Then there's China's big soft power push and the role of the Olympics in presenting this nation in its best possible light to the rest of the world. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Chongli.
2018 has already seen one record broken, the world's largest firework. Now this is it, exploding over the Ras Al Khaimah in the United Arab Emirates. The firework shell was handmade in New York. It took 2 months to build and weighed just over 1,000 kilograms. It was twice the 8 of the previous record holders, which was displayed in Japan in 2014. This is BBC News.